Good afternoon, and could all MPs take their seats, and we can continue on with this very important study, the study of progressive Canadian enterprise and small, medium-sized enterprises through electronic commerce. This is our second meeting. We had a very productive and informative last meeting. We had Monday, and we're looking forward again to doing another one, and we're very happy to have with us today eBay Canada Limited, La Maison Simons Incorporated, and of course, Michael Geist, who always comes when we need him. So good to see you here, sir. So if it's first time for anyone here as a panel, we try to do your opening remarks in 5 minutes or less. Would appreciate it. If you see my red light coming on, it just means you're running out of time. And if you have any further ideas, you can incorporate them in what we have dialogue with the MPs. So without further ado, I think we're going to get started. And we're going to start with eBay Canada. And we have Ms. Andrea Stairs. Go ahead, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. On behalf of eBay Canada, thank you for the opportunity to present before the Standing Committee on International Trade. Before I dive in, I'd like to provide some background about eBay in Canada. Enabling small business to get online and participate in international trade is at the heart of our business model. eBay is one of the world's largest online marketplaces. Launched 17 years ago in Canada, eBay remains a top e-commerce destination, enabling more than $1.5 billion of trade by Canadians annually. Each month, our platform receives 9 million unique Canadian visitors, or nearly a third of the Canadian online population. In addition to changing how consumers buy, e-commerce has also changed the ways in which we sell. In fact, Canadians on eBay sell more than 1 million items each month. E-commerce is also leveling the playing field for rural retailers. By leveraging the power of the internet, platforms like eBay have effectively decoupled entrepreneurial success from the need to locate in population centers. Take, for instance, Christine Delaurier, who's been able to create a thriving sports apparel business in the tiny town of Blizzard Valley, Ontario. This due largely to the sales her eBay store receives. eBay's platform is also one in which even the smallest business can engage in international trade. In fact, 99% of Canadian commercial sellers on eBay export internationally, which stands in stark contrast to the export rate of traditional SMEs at less than 15%. And these businesses reach vastly more markets than their traditional peers, 18 countries on average for eBay sellers versus 2.5 countries on average per year for traditional SMEs. Finally, our data finds that for eBay commercial sellers who export, more than half of their sales come from international buyers. These sellers are, in fact, micro-multinationals. It's important to note that internet-enabled trade differs significantly from traditional trade. Exporters don't forward deploy inventory or enter into foreign distribution agreements. Rather, platforms like eBay drive demand in foreign markets and create the connection and the trust between consumers and retailers. And unlike traditional exports, this trade occurs via individual orders crisscrossing the globe, with shipments clearing borders via consumer channels rather than commercial ones. Given eBay's role in working with these micro-multinationals, my team and I are acutely aware of the frictions associated with this trade and the federal actions that could address them. Specifically, I'd like to recommend a change to the Canadian de minimis threshold so as to empower Canadian small and medium businesses to thrive in the global economy. As you're aware, the de minimis threshold is the value above which goods shipped into the country can be assessed for duties and taxes. The $20 threshold was originally set in 1985, prior to the birth of e-commerce. In fact, had it simply been increased with inflation, Canada's de minimis threshold would now stand at almost $45. Instead, Canada's de minimis is the lowest in the industrialized world and among the lowest globally. This low de minimis level causes major friction for Canadian small business. It negatively impacts their ability to access low-value international supply chains and creates red tape when purchases are returned from foreign buyers. In fact, a report from the C.D. Howe Institute found that an increase in the de minimis level from $20 to $80 would benefit Canadian businesses by more than $100 million in reduced red tape and other costs. Furthermore, Canada's low de minimis threshold does not support what the Canadian consumer wants: fairness and choice. E-commerce gives rural Canadians or Canadians with physical limitations access to goods that are otherwise hard to find. It's not hard to understand why a poll conducted by Nanos Research found that 76% of Canadians were supportive of a modest increase in the de minimis threshold. Finally, an increase in the de minimis threshold would improve government efficiencies. The same C.D. Howe Institute report found that the Government of Canada is spending $166 million to collect just $39 million in duty and taxes on goods valued between $20 and $80. As taxpayers, we should all be concerned that the cost of enforcing the de minimis threshold dramatically exceeds the revenues collected on low-value purchases. As a platform for small business, eBay respectfully requests that the committee consider an increase to Canada's outdated de minimis threshold through its review of ways to support progressive Canadian enterprise through electronic commerce. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Madam Stairs. And we're going to move over to Mr. Simons. And, well, Mr. Simons, you have the oldest family enterprise in Canada. And
Yes.
You were founded in 1840.
1840, yeah.
Congratulations to you and your family and your success. And anyway, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee for the opportunity today to express my ideas regarding this issue. As you mentioned, we're the oldest family private business operating in Canada, and I think it gives us a unique view on the evolution of a variety of technologies that are starting to impact our economy, be it automation, AI, and the refinement of applied mathematics in managing our business. As a national retailer, we're at the forefront of these changes, and it's giving us unique insight into how this third industrial revolution is going to impact our economy and our country. But more importantly, how it's impacting our values as a family business and our values as Canadians. But today, I'm not here to lobby with a narrow vision for the retail industry or another egocentric, narrow constituency. I'd like to speak today as a citizen, as a father of two children, a technophile, I want to underline, a proud Canadian with dreams of the potential for this great nation. My thesis, my objective today is to impress upon our political establishment the necessity for courageous, visionary change to ensure not only fiscal equity in the future, but also our ability as a country to build our communities around the values and projects we aspire to. That is what is at stake here. Despite awesome potential that technological change offers us, its negative impact will cause enormous social turmoil, even upheaval, if we continue to address these changes with archaic fiscal legislation created 100 years ago. An ad hoc approach of piecemeal actions that focus on easy change will not suffice, in my mind. Our government's efforts will appear arbitrary, impossible to explain or defend, leading to further social inequality and instability. Ultimately, we will, as a country, as a nation, be unable to afford the very values that define our project as a country. We're in the early stages of a revolution. I'm on the forefront of it in retail. As McAfee said in The Second Machine Age, we're on the second half of the chessboard. This is a point where geometric acceleration will both outline and underline the potential and the dangers that await us. As a businessman, I've got 1 foot in the old economy with stores and 1 foot in the new economy with our the second largest website in Quebec and the top 10 in our category in the country. I want to bring to you today a view from the battlefield of what's going on. There has to exist a sense of crisis and urgency, and we need thoughtful action, or else we will no longer control our destiny, in my mind. Ultimately, this revolution will arrive right here in Ottawa at your doorstep. You'll find yourself facing eroding tax bases and the inability to offer adequate, essential services such as education and health care. And also the inability to effect essential change to a more, for example, sustainable low-emission economy. Until we clearly identify the problems and causality, we will find ourselves, I believe, in a cycle of austerity and then budget cuts, temporary surplus and austerity. And that is the direction until we identify the causes and we modernize the legislation. Quickly, if you believe that have this sense of urgency, which I bring here today, I think the government has to look at a number of things. One, if we believe in a global trading system, then companies and citizens must accept that there's a new global fiscal framework to be put in place. We must engage with emerging groups of nations, France, Germany, Australia, who are beginning to reflect not only to lobby for their particular interests, but are beginning to reflect on a 21st century global consensus for fiscal equity. Access to open global trade networks is not a right. It is a privilege that has been built by hard work over the past decades, and it comes with responsibilities. A refusal to engage transparently in the new global initiatives should be met very severely. We must understand that it is citizens that require services, and thus taxation must be accrued at the points of consumption. Without this fundamental principle, smaller, less populous regions will always be able to profit from the ability of individuals and organizations to transfer activities to less populous, more fiscally advantageous countries. Tangible and intangible products must be taxed in the same manner. The reality is most products today are a combination of both. In a restaurant, 25% is actual physical food. The other 75% is experience. To imagine that we can separate these two or consider them differently is just nonsensical. It will lead to a massive erosion of our tax base as the economy continues to dematerialize, and this is going to impact our cities and our ability to evolve. 4, governments must avoid focusing on small, limited actions until a broader platform of ideas and directions are in place. This is, in my mind, a crisis. To focus on little items such as employee discounts for the young woman who works 15 hours at Simons, which was an issue a couple of weeks ago, just doesn't have any vision to it at all. And I think it will be seen as arbitrary by citizens, and consequently, change will be impossible to effect. 5, sales tax in Canada must be collected on all products, both tangible and intangible. We must find a way to collect it at the point of sale and accumulate it at the point of consumption. 6, de minimis levels must be set at 0. I find it difficult to believe we're continuing to have this. I am for thin borders, easy trade. I'm a free trader. However, to not set de minimis at 0 is basically destroying the idea of localizing tax collection at the point of consumption. Operating in Canada is a privilege. Companies must transparently and honestly accept the responsibilities accompanied with that privilege. Higher de minimis levels will decouple the connection between fiscality and the locality of consumption. 7, I believe governments must rethink industrial job creation policies and subsidies. That's where we're at. The core to the future is education, both university and technical. That's the focus is education. 8, Canada must participate in the movement to redefine corporate taxation based on where actual sales, consumption, employees, citizens, and physical assets are located. 9, I believe Canada must push with the
Sorry, you don't have to wrap
okay,
up.
that's it. Well, I'm sorry. That's what I believe. That's what I think. So those are 9 points of action that I think are essential to this change.
Well, thank you, sir, and thanks for your frank presentation. It's good. And we're going to move over to Mr. Geist. You got the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thanks very much. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Geist. I'm a law professor at the University of Ottawa, where I hold the Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law. As always, I appear today in a personal capacity representing only my own views. While there are many Canadian e-commerce success stories, often that started small, everything from e-commerce platforms by services like Hootsuite and retailers like Clearly Contacts. There are also, as we've just heard, many smaller businesses that use a combination of e-commerce, social media, and online platforms to raise awareness and foster customer loyalty. In my view, the question for this committee is what, if anything, should the government be doing to further facilitate e-commerce in Canada? Are there current regulatory or legal barriers? Are there opportunities for the government to help support e-commerce growth? Are there instances of an uneven playing field that disadvantages Canadian online businesses? I believe the answer is yes, and I'd like to quickly focus on 5. I'll start first with access. It may be stating the obvious, but universal, affordable Internet access is the foundation for e-commerce. If Canadians are not online, they are not buying online. I said Minister Navdeep Bains was right when he said earlier this year, we need every Canadian to be innovation ready to spot opportunities, imagine possibilities, discover new ideas, start new businesses, and create new jobs. All Canadians need access to high-speed Internet regardless of their income level or postal code. And until we bridge this digital divide, Canadians will not reach their full potential. There is still much to be done to bridge this digital divide. Too many Canadians still do not have affordable access, and our pricing, particularly for wireless services, remains amongst the highest in the developed world. We need public investment to support universal affordable access and policy measures designed to foster enhanced mobile competition. Moreover, proposals such as the committee heard earlier this week calling for an internet service provider tax, an internet tax, which by the advocates' own estimates would add over $100 million a year to the costs of consumer internet access, should be rejected. Secondly, consumer trust and confidence. Even if Canadians are online, their willingness to engage depends on trust. Trust that their information will be used appropriately, and trust that online sellers will deliver what is promised. The need to foster trust has a government policy dimension. For example, concerns associated with fraudulent spam undermines the potential success of all e-commerce activities. The Industry Committee is currently reviewing CASL, the anti-spam legislation, and there are business groups that are criticizing the law as overbroad, yet it is having a positive impact, with some studies finding that there's a 37% reduction in spam originating from Canada and a reduction of spam into Canadians' inboxes. It is essential that Canada have a tough anti-spam law to help facilitate online trust. Further, we need to ensure that long overdue security breach disclosure rules come into effect as quickly as possible, ensuring that our privacy legislation keeps pace with global standards, particularly those that are emerging out of the European Union. Third, intermediary liability. If you were to canvass many of the biggest digital-first businesses today, social media and companies and other online services, about the relative risks, legal risks in Canada as opposed to the United States, many would likely point to the absence of safe harbor rules for content and the contributions of third parties in Canada. That's an issue that's largely hidden to the general public, but in the United States, internet giants such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and indeed eBay, as well as small companies that invite feedback, comments, and user participation, are protected from liability for the content of third parties through a statute known as the Communications Decency Act, the CDA, which provides that an intermediary is not liable for the third-party content it hosts, but does not actively review. The standard makes sense. In a world where platforms may have millions or even billions of users, placing editorial responsibility on the site is a recipe for disaster with users going elsewhere. Canada does not have a statutory equivalent. In practice, what that means is that sites either relocate to the United States where they have that safe harbor, or they simply remove content, often perfectly lawful content, for fear of liability. If we want to compete on the global e-commerce stage, we need laws that does not place Canadian businesses at a competitive disadvantage. Fourth, intellectual property laws. As I mentioned in my last appearance before this committee on NAFTA, Canadian companies, particularly those active in the digital environment, may be at a disadvantage with our restrictive IP laws when compared to some of the more flexible rules found in the United States. For example, the availability of fair use in copyright in the U.S. represents a significant competitive advantage for U.S. businesses and creators. Similarly, Canada's anti-circumvention provisions, often referred to as digital lock rules, are amongst the most restrictive in the world and create unnecessary limits on innovation. Finally, fifth, digital trade and e-commerce chapters in trade agreements. The committee has heard, as recently as earlier this week, about the need for an e-commerce or digital trade chapter in our trade agreements. I think there's some value there, but we should be wary of provisions that undermine legitimate public policy interests, including privacy and security. For example, the U.S. has identified restrictions on local data storage, often called data localization, as one of its objectives. Canadian government should resist those efforts within NAFTA or within the restarted TPP-11 to limit the ability of federal or provincial governments to establish legitimate privacy and security safeguards through data localization requirements. Similarly, limitations on data transfer restrictions, which mandate the free flow of information on networks across borders, can raise similar concerns. The U.S. has been seeking a ban on data transfer restrictions, and I think we ought to ensure that our privacy and security rules aren't superseded by trade agreements such as NAFTA or the TPP-11. In sum, we're succeeding in e-commerce, but we can do better, and there is a role for the federal government to help make it happen. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, sir, and that wraps up the panelists' presentations, and we're going to go right into dialogue with the MPs, and we're going to start off with the Conservative Party. Mr. Allison, you got the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To witnesses, thank you for being here today. One of our witnesses earlier this week, Startup Canada, was just talking about how difficult it is for startups. I shouldn't say difficult, but how it's more challenging in terms of understanding what they can do to export and how they can figure that stuff out. Obviously, larger companies have got capacity to bring it in-house, or they grow over time and they figure that stuff out. So my first question to you, Ms. Stairs, I know that you talked about the fact that if you're selling on eBay, obviously, or not obviously, but you stated the fact that there's a lot of export component to that. Talk to us about some of the challenges that smaller companies have in trying to figure that out, and some of the things that you guys take care of to help them manage that piece.
Yeah, so I think the good news is it's getting easier. I think both getting online and exporting using the internet to enable exports is getting a lot easier now with with platforms like Shopify, effectively pay as you go that can scale with a business. You don't have to have massive upfront infrastructure investments, software investments in order to get online and to start exporting. Certainly, what we see is that small businesses may start somewhere or even start on eBay and use that as a way to kind of test the waters. It's a very low risk way to kind of dip your toe into exports. eBay is creating creating the trust, is facilitating the transaction, is providing guarantees on both sides. That being said, when we talk to the small businesses that trade on eBay, I think that they are not as aware as they should be of all of the kind of programs and benefits that are open to them to get them going. We've had roundtables with both the current Minister of International Trade and the minister from the prior government, and in both cases, the question was asked to our sellers, what programs have you availed yourself of the government, and the answer was effectively none. So I think there needs to be much better communication and much better, for lack of a better word, marketing to small businesses to kind of let them know what's available to them. But certainly getting online with platforms like eBay and similar ones can take a lot of the heavy lifting out, because those platforms are able to immediately connect them with demand in any number of countries.
How would you do that, given, and I realize that's a problem for startups, not always knowing what's out there and what's available. So how would you, what would that marketing piece look like, or how would that happen? Because there are good programs that the government offers, and you're right, people are not necessarily aware of what they are.
I mean, I think, so I totally agree. I think there's some great programs. I think we do need to create programs that are, that respond to this new version of internet-enabled trade, because a lot of the programs exist react to a model of trade that's the sort of old model of trade, where you need distribution agreements in foreign markets, and you need to have contacts there, and the Trade Commissioner will facilitate that. But that being said, having a one-stop shop, being able to advertise where the businesses are, which is in social media, using platforms like eBay to bridge that gap, and I think all of those are good ideas.
Okay. I just got about a minute and a half left. Mr. Geist, you talked about the chapter on e-commerce, et cetera, and you did mention a couple of things, obviously privacy and security, but you also, what are some of the other things that we need to be looking at as we, negotiate this NAFTA chapter and upgrade and deal with this whole chapter in e-commerce and digital?
Yeah, so I think we've done a good job, generally speaking, domestically in establishing e-commerce related rules. We've got fairly high standards when it comes for privacy, and we've got consumer protection rules that could still be improved, but we do fairly well, and we've got the anti-spam law that I made reference to as well. One of the problems I thought with the TPP 12, the original TPP, is that it established a really low standard, and that in fact on many of those issues Canada was content to have provisions that didn't come close to the kinds of things that we've established here. And so if we're looking for level playing fields, and if we're looking for Canadian businesses to have the opportunity to take advantages in other jurisdictions and see them grow elsewhere, then I think we ought to be looking for a higher level standard. And so a good example would be actually in the TPP 11 agreement. It's the U.S., for example, that sought to lower the standard when it came to privacy in TPP. Given that they are now out of those discussions as part of TPP 11, there might well be an opportunity for Canada to advocate for a higher level standard when it comes to some of the privacy provisions in that chapter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You're right on time. Gee, must have a stop clock over there. Good show. So we're going to move over to Liberals now, and Madame Lapointe, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to see you here today. I appreciate you coming. Mr. Simons, I have a question for you. You participated in the program Tout le monde en parle, which is a very popular program on Quebec TV. And you mentioned that it was very important for commerce to be competitive. Do you think that businesses can be competitive here in Canada with businesses from the south, from elsewhere, when it comes to e-commerce? Yes. I think that we need to invest, and I do invest. I think, though, that it is not a level playing field, and that's why I come back to this zero de minimis threshold. It's important that once we have a level playing field, we can then act and we can be competitive. Our distribution channels are world-class, 50 million transactions, and so if we can deal with the other issues, the minimum thresholds, then we can let businesses become competitive. But you say that if we have this level playing field, we can do this. You talked about no, we don't have a level playing field right now. There's the whole issue of sales taxes, whether they're collected or not, a lot of uncertainty regarding the de minimis threshold. And once all of that is in place, there will still be major challenges. But we can meet those challenges because we are capable, we have the technology and everything we need to do that. But if we start the race, because we have 15% taxes, we have customs, and then we have the de minimis threshold, we're behind the 8 ball. Now, what about employees? And there is this idea of putting the taxes closer to the local level, the level of consumers. Do you have any suggestions? Well, I don't necessarily have the ability to answer the question fully, but I think that if we have to not be naive, we have to have a sales tax in place, and if we have, we're not in a situation where we have driverless cars at this point, but we need to be more proactive and engage, because we have a consensus that is forming. We can either be visionary now, or we can get to a crisis situation and deal with the problems. When we look at France, Germany, Australia, they are ahead of us in thinking about these issues, and there is starting to be a consensus. On the TV program, you talked about $1.3 billion. You were talking about the business association in Quebec. You don't know where that figure came. That wasn't just for Quebec. It was for all of Canada. Yes, we don't collect. Well, sales are lost because of the sales tax being collected. All of my sales are collected. We have the customs, and then we have a competitive disadvantage that is created for me. All we are asking for is equal treatment. It costs a lot. For example, I create the channels, but Amazon takes advantage of it. I have one last question. On the program, you indicated that there was another well-known business in Quebec that is called Omer Dessert, and that was able to make inroads in the United States. Well, I don't exactly remember what I was saying there, but with a de minimis of $800, I think there would be a vast choice of locations. So I think that it applies to a broad range of decisions.
Just be careful with the questions coming on the end of your 5 minutes. It throws a, I know. It's okay. It was a good question, but save it for the next round. We're going to go to Ms. Ramsey. Go ahead. You got 5 minutes.
I apologize for being late. I appreciate, Mr. Simons, that you sent us your brief in advance so that I could look through it. And I think I know the position of eBay and Mr. Geist quite well. But around this e-commerce, I really want to talk about the levels of protection and privacy protection. And I know, Mr. Geist, that you've been critical of the fact that there really are voluntary undertakings in our agreements so far. And I'm wondering, how can the government help SMEs and their customers around these particular rules of privacy? How important is it to Canadians and Canadian consumers? And if you could expand a little bit on, you mentioned the TPP, but maybe some of the things that you see that we could incorporate into trade agreements to have growth for SMEs, but also protect our privacy.
Right. Well, I think Canadian privacy law, as I mentioned, largely meets global standards, although we've started to see the European Union in particular, through something known as the GDPR, escalate or elevate those standards. And I think that we're going to rapidly face some challenges if the EU starts digging into whether or not we continue to meet those standards. In terms of compliance, we've got domestically, we've got a privacy commissioner that, of course, enforces, and on the anti-spam rules, it's a shared responsibility between the commissioner and the Competition Bureau and the CRTC. So we've got a number of players there on the domestic front. How Canada can help develop, I guess, better privacy protections on a global basis, particularly when Canadians may purchase or engage with foreign entities to ensure that there's adequate privacy protection. That's where there is, I suppose, the potential for trade agreements to play a role. And as I mentioned in my earlier response to Mr. Allison, it seems to me that one of the challenges that we're facing is that to the extent to which we're negotiating with the United States, the U.S. has not been a particularly strong supporter of strong privacy protections. It tends to adopt more of an anything-goes approach. So long as you disclose what it is that you're going to do and someone agrees to it, then so be it. I'd argue that's a bit of a fiction. Most people don't know the kinds of things that they are clicking their way into. And so developing baseline standards of privacy protection is an important thing to do, certainly domestically. And as we enter into some of these trade agreements, whether NAFTA or TPP 11 or perhaps some others, we need to ensure that we establish an appropriate benchmark in those agreements.
Okay. Thank you. The other thing that's really come up at this study has been about fair taxation and about having a level playing field with U.S. companies, large, multinationals like Netflix, like Facebook and Google, that aren't paying the same amount of tax or paying essentially no tax to operate those platforms here in Canada. There are other countries like New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and the EU that have begun to bring laws into place and regulations that will allow them to collect some of those taxes. So I wonder if you can speak to how important it is to close that loophole. And I'll open that to anyone, because I think that our Canadian businesses and entrepreneurs really need to have a level playing field in the digital space. So I'll open it up to your thoughts on how important it is to close that loophole. Anyone?
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, Mr. Simons obviously has made a strong case for why he thinks there's a problem. I guess I'll say a couple of things. First off, I think that there is an inevitability to sales taxes in the online environment. So I feel like a lot of this debate over Netflix sales taxes, first off, the notion that somehow there's a whole lot of people out there that are about to drop their Netflix subscriptions to go to something else strikes me as highly unlikely. It's a well-priced product, and if you added the sales tax, I don't think it would move the meter very much. That said, there are some countries that are starting to experiment it. I think there are some dangers about implementing across-the-board sales taxes for anybody that happens to sell. The compliance costs, the enforcement costs for modest sales into Canada Canada might well result in many of those businesses avoiding the Canadian market altogether, and that would decrease consumer choice and lessen competition. The last point I'd make, and with all respect to my colleague on the panel here, no Canadian company succeeds in the e-commerce environment by solely targeting the Canadian market. And so the notion that somehow if only we taxed everybody trying to sell into the Canadian market, there'd be opportunities for Canadian businesses to succeed online, with respect, I don't think that's consistent with what we've seen. We've seen over the last decade or so, consistently, Canadian companies can compete in the global market, but the only way you compete in the global market is by competing in the global market. And trying to increase costs in the Canadian market for some of that competition isn't really an effective way to do that.
Yeah, I think it's about
Thank
leveling
you,
the
sir.
playing
I'm sorry,
field.
Ms. Ramsey, your time is up.
Well, that was quick.
I know it was quick, but that's when you have great dialogue going on. But we're going to move on. You'll have another 3 minutes later on. We're going to go over to Liberals. Mr. Dhaliwal, you've got 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters. Mr. Chair, in January, there was an article published in Globe and Mail. There were 50,000 eBay customers signed a petition to the Minister of Finance to raise that threshold limit. But on the other hand, the local consumers were not in favor of it. How do you see that raising that threshold limit will negatively impact Canadian businesses, continuing with what Mr. Geist was saying?
How will it negatively impact Canadian business?
Yes.
Well, in fact, I don't think that it will negatively impact Canadian business. I think that the CD Howe report was pretty clear that an increase in the threshold would actually unlock $100 million worth of red tape cost from Canadian small business. The reason that eBay has been advocating on behalf of small, medium businesses for an increase in the threshold is precisely to Mr. Geist's point, to remove some of the frictions that are currently applied to Canadian small business as they try and transact in the global economy. I think that the playing field is not level precisely because, you've got Canadian companies, small, medium businesses trying to engage in global e-commerce with using a de minimis threshold of $20 that is over 30 years old, set before e-commerce was a thing, competing against American sellers who were facing a de minimis threshold of $800. So, in fact, I think that increasing the threshold, creating freer trade for small, medium businesses would be a benefit, net benefit to the country, and certainly it would be a benefit to Canadian taxpayers. We understand that even with the low enforcement threshold or low enforcement that currently exists, where most packages coming through the postal channel are waved through low value packages, even with that in case, we know that the Canadian government is spending $170 million to collect $40 million in revenue. There must be a better way to spend those dollars.
In a constituency like mine, Surrey Newton, 90% of the businesses are small businesses.
Right.
And how eBay or other platforms can help for them to grow so as they don't have to face the challenges that they're facing right now.
Yeah, so that's precisely it. So when we talk about our commercial sellers, these are tiny micro businesses, right? These are businesses of 1, 2, 3, 4 people that may not have the expertise to launch a full-blown exporting business of their own. But by listing their inventory on a platform like eBay, they're able to close that gap. They're able to transact with customers in Australia and the UK and the US and anywhere else on the planet, and do so at a very low cost. The cost of entry has effectively been done away with for exports. And so I think precisely platforms like eBay are able to open up and democratize international trade in a way that hasn't been the case up until now, where trade has been the domain of large enterprises that are able to ship vast quantities of goods around the world. That's no longer the case.
So what steps are you taking to make them familiar with these type of platforms that are available. You are telling that
We
government
spend a
should be
lot
the
on
one-
marketing. So, yeah, I mean, we're trying to tell the story. We had an event here last week in Ottawa where where members of the committee were there, which was lovely to see and participating, where we, in fact, honored small, medium businesses that had done really well on the platform, and we use events like those, we use marketing, whatever, to tell the story. And I think that is something that we need to do more in Canada, is create a narrative of small business success, of what that looks like. So it's people like me can do it, as opposed to, kind of the Shopifys of the world. Awesome example and great success story, but there are a lot of micro businesses that are doing tremendously well, and so eBay definitely spends a lot of resources to try and bring those to the surface and publicize those.
Okay,
I think that's,
thank you.
time is pretty well up. And so that ends our first round. We're going to go into a second round. We have a little bit of a pinging going on. You can hear it, but I think it's from if your headpiece is too close to your mic. So I think that's what's causing it. So when you're speaking in the mic, you might want to keep your distance. We would assume that's it. Okay, we're going to go on to the second round, and we're going to start off with the Liberals, and they got 5 minutes. Mr. Fonseca, you got the floor. Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our presenters. And Mr. Simons, congratulations just on the success that you've had over, well, many decades, centuries, actually. We look at Eaton's and Simpson's and Sears and, the demise of those companies. And kind of what I'd like to ask is how you've reinvented yourself. Thank you very much for opening up your first store, your flagship there in Mississauga, Ontario.
Thanks.
My riding, that's great. All those jobs that you've brought and the investments that you've made. I want to know about what has kept you so successful, how you work with those small businesses that supply to you. So how do you help bring them along, or as part of your supply chain? Do you provide those the resources, the expertise to be able to get them into your supply chain, keep them in your supply chain, keep them growing?
Okay, I'll address that in two parts. How we've stayed successful. It's been very demanding for a private company over the last 10 years. We've invested massively in our e-commerce operations. We still feel that there's a new equilibrium business model being formed between stores and e-commerce, but it is required. Today we run a world-class Tier 1 platform. We're using facial image recognition technology from Spain. We've really tried to stay on the forefront of technology, but it's been very demanding from an investment point of view. It's been essential because e-commerce is no longer just a separate business. We do sell in the U.S., so we are international. It's really become the backbone of all our IT infrastructure, and it will continue to be that way. In that regard, that's what I think. Your second question then was?
Just about your supply chain, and do you bring in product from SMEs? So some of your smaller manufacturers.
Dealing with, it's amazing how much creativity there is, and I think in Canada at that micro level, that small level, be it Philippe Dubuc, who's a designer in Montreal, runs one shop. We've been supporting him. We're working with new startups from coast to coast today. And they're not only product startups we're bringing in, we're finding young creative artists who really have no interest in commercializing their art. Perhaps we have new ways to help them commercialize their skill set. So A-Shop, En Masse, these are artisanal workshops that are going. So I'm really proud about what we're doing in Canada to pair up with these creative resources, and our customers are reacting very positively to it too. So we definitely bring them in, and we try to nurture them along, and I think it's win-win.
So it seems like you've always been ahead of the game. We often talk about governments sometimes not keeping pace with the services that we provide in terms of CanExport or trade commissions. Are those helping you?
As of today, I've never accepted a dollar of. I'm sorry. There's a scientific tax credit for innovation in supply chain that we've accessed, but it's a non-factor for us. We put together a vision of what we want to build. and we've struggled to build it on our own. And I'm prepared to continue doing that. Again, I said we're on the verge of trying to break ground on what will be a $100 million robotic purchase from building a total project $150 million to render our distribution world class. We're ready to compete. It should be a level playing field, and I think we have to come to see what is ultimately going to be unavoidable. We have the technology today to simply, I think the idea of little orders can't collect taxes, I think this is disingenuous, honestly. We have the technology today to easily collect these taxes, and yes, I think the U.S. de minimis should be at 0 too, or there's going to be problems. So I'm not arguing for an unlevel playing field. I'm arguing for common sense. I'm arguing for the fact that our societies are aging. There are values and things we want to do in Canada, and we're going to have to finance them. I believe change is going to be very focused on the cities, especially in energy grid and sustainability. And I think as you see dematerialization happen in your city, such as Mississauga, you will start to find a reduction in your real estate roles, and you'll find an erosion of your city tax bases. And I think it's going to be very detrimental to our ability to modernize our cities in Canada. So I really come back to that level playing field.
To Mr.
Nice try, wise guy. No, I know you're on a roll, but your time is up, and I know.
Rebuttal
anyway, all going well this afternoon. We have to move forward to the Conservatives for 5 minutes, and we got Mr. Dreeshen. You got the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly it's great to be able to speak to you. And again, one of the key things that was brought up earlier was the internet, and of course how we were able to manage that. I was on Industry, Science and Technology. We were about to study rural and remote or internet capabilities in rural remote Canada, and hopefully that's going to be continued and looked at. But that's really one of the major criticisms and concerns that we have right now. It seems as though the costs associated with it and the coverage that is there, obviously it's where the major population is, and that's something that has to be addressed. And again, I think that the businesses are the ones that can help push governments to make sure that they've kind of got that they're focused in the right direction. And I think too the other thing to recognize is what's taking place is the disruptive technologies that are out there. And I do think back to Sears, and to me, when I was a kid, it was all the catalog. I didn't know they had buildings. Now, if we're looking at what is happening now, they kind of got lost in that. And of course, with so many businesses, we have these stranded assets that are there as they put millions and millions of dollars into these things. But that isn't what's going to be needed in the future. And I think really that's kind of one of the key things that I'd like us to be able to focus on. So from the panelists, are there ways that we can ensure that the requirements needed for our internet services are up to par for all of Canada and not simply the corridors of population? Mr. Geist? Okay.
Well, there's a reason that I started amongst the 5 with access, because I really do think that it is the foundational issue that you have to address. And you are right to note that there is not equality of access today, and access, even where it is available in many places, remains expensive, which creates, in a sense, 2 sets of digital divides in Canada. We've got a digital divide sometimes between urban and rural, with communities that don't have any access at all, and we have even within urban communities where internet is available, it may be unaffordable. And so that's why there's an emphasis, I think, both on affordability and on access. We've seen various programs, and of course successive governments from both sides endeavor to establish programs and prioritize the issue, and we haven't made the kind of progress that I think we would have otherwise hoped for, given that there are still too many Canadians that don't have that kind of access, and that can't help but create a real laggard when it comes to e-commerce adoption, whether as consumers or as businesses seeking to adopt. And so I think that means at times investment where the market won't otherwise invest. I think it means finding ways to inject new competition, particularly in the wireless sector. So things like MVNOs which are seen as virtual companies riding on the network but offering up the prospect of greater levels of competition, are the kinds of things that we see in some other jurisdictions. And then continuing with spectrum policy that seeks to inject some of those new competitors into the marketplace as well. It's not going to happen overnight, but unless it is a top priority with clear targets and objectives, and the CRTC tried to do that, I fear that we're going to be here 5 years from now still talking about the number of Canadians that can't afford or don't have access.
So then, Ms. Stairs, your organization, when you're looking at e-commerce and so on, they would be the ones most affected by this or the restrictions that exist there. Is there any discussions within your organizations that are talking about how that can be improved, at least on the e-commerce side of things?
I mean, certainly we are very much advocates for investing in access because we see the potential, and we certainly see that platforms like eBay, but any number of platforms allow people to have to make money, support a family, hire people in their local community, and stay in their local community, which is something that we see over and over again. I think that how we bridge that gap, certainly we have participated in some of the consultations with ISED and are very supportive of that. But what we bring to the table is the platform. And so, to Mr. Geist's point, people need to be able to access the platform. Once they can access the platform at a decent speed, at a decent cost, it is amazing that the world is now suddenly your oyster and you can stay wherever you happen to be in the country. We did a heat map that looked at commercial activity by population, and you saw sort of hotspots in southern Ontario. But you also saw that northern BC and the southern part of the Northwest Territories were hotbeds of e-commerce activity, and that's precisely because people are able to access, can stay in their small communities, and have meaningful commercial activity as a result of the access.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that wraps up the time. We're going to move over to the Liberals, and Madam Ludwig, you got the floor.
Thank you. Fascinating testimony. Thank you very much. My first question is around the business community itself. There are many that have said that the business community is turning flat as we get more involved with e-commerce. We had Matthew Wilson was here earlier this week from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, and he talked about the importance of Brand Canada. In the e-commerce environment, is that an important aspect to trade, that people know that they're buying a Canadian-made suit or a Canadian-made item or service?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that Canada, to Michael's point, Canada is seen as having good protections, a good infrastructure, and trading with a Canadian company feels more secure than trading with companies from other jurisdictions. I think there is a massive benefit to Brand Canada. Is it all that it could be? Perhaps not, but absolutely there's a benefit.
My next question, I'm going to start with Dr. Geist and move along. I know in previous testimony you've talked about cybersecurity, and I'll just give a local example. There's a small inn in my community, and someone had basically fraudulently copied the website, and people were paying that they were staying at this inn. So not only did they lose the revenue for it, and they lost the bookings because they said that they were double booked when the person finally arrived, but certainly the individual lost their personal experience and some of their personal information. So for all of you on the committee, how do we protect and enhance the protection of consumers and businesses against cybersecurity?
So, well, I'll start just by noting that I think there's no single solution, and you're right to highlight it as an issue. And I mentioned in my opening remarks the importance of trust, and highlighted that in the context of the anti-spam legislation. It is worth emphasizing that the anti-spam legislation isn't just about dealing with fraudulent spam. And so it deals with malware, it deals with phishing attempts, which can be used in some of those instances. So we do have some of those rules in place, and I think it is important to recognize that there is, in my view, a concerted effort really to water down that legislation. At least I appeared before Indu a week or so ago, and so and have seen some of that testimony. But if you take a look at the data, we established a world-class law, and in fact, the data suggests that even on the email e-commerce side, Canada has higher deliverability rates, higher click-through rates than we see in other places. In other words, people are more trusting of email e-commerce in Canada than they are in the United States, as more of them are likely to click through. And part of that may well be because we've seen an increase as a result of tough anti-spam laws that had the effect of cleaning up many of the lists and made that aspect of e-commerce more effective.
Thank you. And Mr. Simons, are you working, your company must focus quite significantly on cybersecurity?
We have, it's an important area. The only comment I would say, without perhaps as much reflection on the issue from a personal point of view, is there has to be a good cooperation regarding payment providers. I've had a number of experiences where we have a piece of sort of AI that identifies potentially fraudulent transactions, which we block, and then we automatically review. And when I review them, I know they're fraudulent. I call the banks that say it's fraudulent, and no one wants to talk to me. They tell me to ship it anyway, and because it's just part of their loss that they're going to pass on to their consumers. So in any security, part of security, it really is a team effort, and I think there would be something to do to really underline the fact that not only the internet sites, but the payment providers really have to be sensitized to it and not just blow it off as a cost of business.
And the payment providers are also collecting taxes that will go back into the local communities?
On the fraudulent payments? Or?
No, just in general.
In general, no. I collect my taxes and
Okay.
I remit them to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Stairs?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the earlier points, trust is critical, both on domestic transactions and particularly in terms of international trade transactions that happen over e-commerce. eBay as a platform, that is one of our absolute top priorities. It's not my area of expertise, but I know for a fact that we invest tremendous amounts. There are bad actors out there who are constantly, banging away, trying to find ways to exploit weaknesses. So I think, to Mr. Simon's point, it is something that has to, the focus on security has to be something that is carried through the entire transaction, the entire flow, because the one weak point will be found and exploited. And that's very unfortunate, but that is the way it is. And so it needs to be something that, that all consumers, government, business are all sort of holding hands and taking part in, because if any one of those groups drops the ball, that's exactly where the bad actors will go.
Okay.
Thank you, and wraps up your time, and we're going to move over to the Conservatives. Mr. Carey, you got the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Geist, you mentioned, I think you quoted, the quote is, increased costs in Canadian market, it's not the way to go. And I think you remember I come from Oshawa, and the traditional business was bricks and mortar, and government policy makes a big difference. So if you're increasing electricity rates, putting in new taxes, like we've seen a lot of our jobs ship out. And I see with e-commerce, a lot of these jobs are portable, and these businesses can be portable. They don't necessarily have to be in Canada. And I see that there's a bit of an urgency here if we want to be marketing Canada to the world so that Canadians do get an advantage to this. So maybe I'll start with you, but go across the panel. And you gave us, I think, 5 really good points, but what's the low-hanging fruit here? What advice can you give the government that, maybe over the next 6 months to a year, what could we do policy-wise that would help improve our global competitiveness? And with this e-commerce, is it going to help Canadian businesses to be more competitive internationally? What can you tell us that we could do right now to really help things out?
Well, I'm glad you like the 5 that I started with, and I think those are the kinds of things. Given that we are actively negotiating renegotiating NAFTA, negotiating TPP-11, these are the kinds of issues that are very, very current. I note that I think that taking the perspective that e-commerce is somehow a threat and those jobs can leave is to view e-commerce isn't to view e-commerce in the fulsome of the kind of potential that it has. And you know, I think eBay, of course, provides a paradigm example of how many people can succeed on a global basis. There are lots and lots of examples over the last number of years. I mean, we, in many ways, almost stopped calling it e-commerce and just think of it as commerce because it does reflect how people do business today. And I've got every confidence that Canadians can compete. What we have to get out of is the mindset that what we need to do is erect barriers or have government come in with programs to help make it happen. Now, that's not to suggest that there isn't a role for government to help educate, to certainly help lay the foundation, as I talked about, with things like access. But it's a global marketplace, and what we ought to recognize is that if we're not able to compete on that global level, there are going to be other companies that are going to come in and compete right here at home. I mean, Amazon, we know, for example, is obviously a giant in the space, and not just with the traditional books, of course, but just about anything, including now, of course, groceries. And so when you start thinking about those kinds of paradigm shifts that are taking place from an e-commerce perspective, what we need isn't so much cheerleading, but we need to, in a sense, embrace the commercial opportunities that the internet has brought, and I think recognize that we do have a lot to offer and we can compete.
Mr. Simons?
I agree completely. We have a lot to offer. We can compete. I can just talk from my point of view is what's holding us back right now is really this question of our ability to handle the quantity of transactions in a productive way. It necessitates an enormous investment. I marked here, close NAFTA with zero de minimis, because also economies of scale, the more you move to robotics, the more you move to a fixed cost business. And the key to a fixed cost business is to a certain extent volume. It's zero de minimis isn't about erecting barriers. It's just about, it's a question of how we finance our societies. The second thing is technical education. We're moving in Quebec City into a situation where this investment will require 25 full-time electro engineers to manage and maintain the robotics necessary to continue shipping. Those people are not available in Quebec right now. They're not available. I think probably I would point to technical training to make sure we have the skill set to support the infrastructure that will allow us to grow our businesses rapidly, because that's holding us back right now. So, you know, NAFTA and technical skills available.
Madame Stairs, could you?
Yeah, so I would agree with Dr. Geis. I think that Canadians are ready, willing, and able to compete. I think you know, you only have to look at the myriad of sellers on eBay to see that that's possible. I think that what they're looking for is for you know, regulation that is built for the 21st century, that isn't a holdover from the early 80s. So I would say, you know, the one thing that they talk to me about, two things they talk to me about. One is shipping costs, which is a different panel, a different committee. And the second is a de minimis threshold and the need to essentially get out of their way and take some of the red tape costs off their plate.
All right. Yeah, your time is up. You're right on time.
There you
Mr. Carey, good show. Okay, we're going to move over to NDP, and Mr. Ramsey, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I know this will go quickly, and I was interested to hear about Southwestern Ontario being an e-commerce hotspot. I'd like to chat about that more, but 1/3 of all trade travels through Windsor, through the Detroit corridor, and customs is a huge piece of e-commerce. So you're obviously, you know, shipping to other countries. So I really want to ask you about custom processes and the complexity and some cross-border e-commerce frictions that you have in that space. And this will go likely to, yeah. Go ahead, Stairs.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the interesting thing about e-commerce trade is it's going through consumer channels, like you and I would send something to our aunt in Bethesda. It's not going through channels that have been, or programs that have been set up for commercial use, and so that creates specific frictions. No one's going to be surprised to say that de minimis is one of those big frictions, both in terms of increasing the cost of low-value inputs, and the reality is that these small micro businesses are bringing inventory in to resell in the hundreds of dollars, and then it also is a huge pain point in terms of processing returns. Returns on e-commerce transactions is table stakes. It's something that you need to offer now in order to compete. You know, when you're doing more than half of your business outside of Canada, as most commercial sellers on eBay are, you're bound to be receiving returns from international customers. They tend to get assessed for duties and taxes, which you can reclaim, but that process costs money and diverts time and attention away from what you really want to be doing, which is running your business. And so I think for that reason, sort of aligned with what Dr. Geist was saying, we need to sort of have regulation that acknowledges this new kind of trade and removes some of that friction, while still focusing on the key things of, preventing dangerous goods, preventing the kinds of things that CBSA really needs to focus on. It's clear that picking up a $21 package, assessing it for duties and taxes, costs way more than the revenues that generates. And so if we feel like we need to protect Canadian retail, there must be a more efficient way of doing that in a way that consumers actually can, trust that, hey, this package is above the threshold, it will get assessed, this package is below, it won't. We play duty roulette now, right? Like the stuff coming across the border, half the time it's assessed, half the time it's not. That creates a lot of red tape, a lot of, it doesn't permit Canadian consumers to participate in global e-commerce in the way that their peers in other countries do, and use global e-commerce to fill the gaps from what they're able to get domestically.
Okay, that's, unless somebody got something quick.
I think that for the returns, I agree. The returns are a big part of e-commerce. They're expensive. They have to be automated, and that is a lot of friction. But, I was in my store this morning. I sold a $3 hair accessory. To say that the taxes I collected on it are friction, no, that's just the way it is. That's what we've chosen to do. So collect the taxes. To say there's going to be auto declaration, that doesn't work. The person that's selling, that's shipping to Canada, should collect the taxes, that it be efficient, yes, but to say it's friction and it's protectionism, as far as I'm concerned, collect the same taxes from everyone, but lower the tax rate for everyone then. Lower it by 5% on everything we purchase in Canada. You'd probably be break even, but you can't have one person calling taxes friction and the other one calling it a legal responsibility. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to right to the Liberals again. And Mr. Peterson, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being with us this afternoon. It's very informative. I find the presentations very informative and obviously important as we do our study into e-commerce here in Canada. I have a question. I mean, it seems to me that de minimis is obviously coming up, and there's I think we lack consensus with stakeholders, and it's going to obviously take some more input. And I just wondered if Andrew, I'll start with you. If you see a difference between impacts of raising the de minimis regionally, if other regions would benefit, if there's regional benefit to a change to de minimis at all.
I think the key benefits are going to be for Canadians who don't live near the border, right? So obviously Canadians who live near the border on a consumer basis have had higher in-person duty thresholds for quite some time. And the small businesses that are at the border have also had the benefit of being able to cross the border and receive goods and returns in the U.S. and then drive them back across, which we know happens. So I think the real beneficiaries will be both consumers and small businesses away from the border. And what we know is that Canadians would, I think we need to level set. E-commerce is still a tiny proportion of total retail, right? It's less than 10% of total retail. And while it's growing well, the growth is coming through domestic e-commerce. So Canadians would much prefer buy in-store first, online second, and when they buy online, they'll prefer buy domestically. What they're using e-commerce for, international e-commerce for, is to fill the gaps. And on the small business side, to Dr. Geist's point, in order to survive and create a robust business, you need to trade outside of Canada. I don't think that's news to this committee. And so, being able to access those foreign markets in a way that is efficient, no matter where you are in the country, is critical.
Okay. And Mr. Simons, I don't know if you have any insight into that, whether it be a regional impact, even if we take your suggestion to take the de minimis to zero.
I think the logic for me would be take the de minimis, let's say it is raised, then you do, in a sense, there's an issue of sacrificing your sovereignty, your national independence to make certain decisions, and I'll go to minimum wage. I mean, to build a robotics facility in southern Ontario or in the upper Michigan Peninsula, obviously you look at unemployment rates, accessibility of labor, and you look at minimum wage. If you raise the de minimis, you're effectively probably removing your freedom to make other choices of public policy that I think as a nation we'd probably regret, and we'd be dragged down to a lower level. So the regional impact is more in that regard of where people will localize their businesses.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to touch on something that we haven't really touched on yet, but I think it's an important part of the e-commerce infrastructure, and that's payment systems and the way money travels through the internet and when we're making online purchases. Of course, we have the Visas and MasterCards, the big credit cards play an important role. There's some pushback against those now for fees that may not be commercially viable for some of the people who use those services. Then you have things like PayPal, which is kind of a hybrid, and you look at things like Bitcoin, which obviously undercuts the traditional payment methods altogether. I'm wondering if you guys have given any thought to that infrastructure and what role that's going to play in making sure Canadians can leverage e-commerce to the benefit for Canada and Canadians. Professor Geist, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure, I could start. And I just wanted to quickly chime in even on that last question about the regional side and recognize that there are at least two sides to this coin. There's also a consumer side, and especially in rural communities where the amount of consumer choice may be far less than what is available in an urban community where we don't have some of your stores. What that ultimately means is that they've often not had the choice, or they've had to rely on, let's say, a Sears catalog, if we go back decades. And so what e-commerce has done is create a far more level playing field from a consumer perspective in terms of massively increasing consumer choice. Right. I would argue if what we did was to say to every one of those micro businesses, wherever located anywhere in the world, that one of their obligations is that they have to collect and remit Canadian sales taxes, what we're going to find is that many of those consumers are going to face the frustration we face from time to time, telling us, sorry, we don't sell into your jurisdiction, because the costs that they face are simply far in excess of the kind of revenues they would generate. And so, yes, it makes it easier for Canadian sellers because they don't face that competition, but from a consumer choice perspective, particularly in the regions where there is traditionally less choice, it makes a big difference. In terms of payments, to your specific question, we're already seeing a lot happening, but frankly, we see far more happening in the United States with innovative payment services. And part of that we're very proud of our banking system and how secure it happens to be, but what it also means is that the kind of disruptive innovation in the financial payment sector, which we see happening at a far faster pace in the United States than we do in Canada. And part of it is we get the benefits of a secure banking system, but we also don't get the kind of disruptive innovation that we're seeing elsewhere. And I think longer term, that's a real risk to the kind of growth of e-commerce.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Peterson. We're doing pretty good on time, and I got a request for two short, quick questions. Quick questions, quick answer. Madam Lapointe, go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. Très intéressant. It is very interesting, all this that you've had to say. Mr. Simons, you referred to education as one of the solutions to improve things so that our businesses can be more competitive internationally. And I would like to congratulate you on your investments in that area. So I would like to hear you elaborate on that. I think that as we move toward increasing online commerce, I think that we have a lack of skills. There is a lack of skilled people in Quebec, at least, and so we have to strengthen our education system. We have robotic systems, but we have to develop them, maintain them. We have 2 applied doctorates in mathematics. We have 2 people with that qualification, one from Canada, one from France, and they are working on projects that are really cutting edge. So I think that maintenance and development of these systems is important, and we need the right skill sets. Mr. Fonseca.
Question is to Ms. Stairs, and it's in regards to for large e-platform type organizations like yours, the collection of taxes locally and also your corporate taxes, are they kept here in Canada for all sales that happen in Canada, or do you offshore those somewhere else in the world, because Airbnb, you know, like they put all their money goes to Ireland, and we're not sure even if taxes are being collected locally. And I say that because of rural communities and others got to build roads, infrastructure, et cetera. If we're not collecting those taxes, those rural communities aren't going to be able to get that internet infrastructure. We're not going to be able to build it. So that's what I'd like to hear from you.
So I work for an entity called eBay Canada Limited, which is a Canadian corporation, and we collect and remit taxes on the services that we provide. So on the fees that we charge our sellers, which is how we make revenue, we collect sales tax on that, and that's remitted to the federal government. And then we also give our Canadian sellers the ability to create tax tables so that they also can apply the appropriate tax based on the Canadian jurisdiction, so that they, in fact, can also collect and remit taxes on the sale of goods.
Thank you, and that wraps up the time, and that wraps up our dialogue with the MPs. Well, panelists, thank you very much. A very different perspectives, but we're definitely at a time of trade is different right now with e-commerce. So that's going to end this session. I have folks, MPs, I have 5 minutes of new business. We're just going to break for a minute and get right back at it, okay?